The Sanatorium. Diary of an Investigator. Chapter 2. Alarming Discoveries. The young reader actually seemed quite innocent. She had tied her slightly wavy brunette hair into a ponytail and was wearing a lovely black dress. Maybe she could answer a few questions for me. So I decided to try again, even at the risk of making myself unpopular. "Good evening, my name is Will—" I didn't get any further. "Shh! This is a library," she informed me in a warning tone, giving me a reprimanding look as if I hadn't understood the first time. Then she turned back to her book. I was about to respond, but then it occurred to me that the young lady might very well be one of Dr. Brewer's patients. In fact, considering her behavior, that seemed like the most logical assumption. So I decided to leave her alone for now. Since the only available seating besides the chair occupied by the stoic reader was a small couch, I moved over to the bookshelves filled with fiction, leaving the seats for the ladies. The clergyman followed my lead. However, the ladies also seemed to have no intention of sitting down. I turned to the woman who had been attacked and inquired about her well-being. "Fortunately, I escaped with just a fright," she assured me, though the shock was still clearly visible on her face. She introduced herself as Professor Dr. Stevens McCormick, a history teacher and a personal acquaintance of Dr. Brewer. So the lady was not only beautiful, but also highly educated. When the two other gentlemen saw us conversing, they joined us, and we introduced ourselves to one another. The clergyman's name was Father Benedict, a Franciscan monk, and, in fact, a native Irishman. The well-groomed gentleman turned out to be Dr. Tiller, a psychoanalyst and physician. Both had come here out of scientific interest. Father Benedict because of one of the patients, and Dr. Tiller, it seemed, had been drawn by curiosity about Dr. Brewer's research. The second lady of our illustrious group, the one who had kicked the attacker in the head, was less talkative but all the more restless. First, she cast a brief glance through the second door in the room, then she disappeared into the foyer. As we continued our conversation, we could hear her opening several doors and even rattling some that were apparently locked. Given that Blanche had asked us to wait in the library, her behavior struck me as somewhat impolite at first. However, moments later we heard the sound of running water. It seemed she had simply needed to relieve herself urgently. Shortly afterward, she returned to the library, joined our group, and introduced herself as Lady Elizabeth Gordon. She too had come here out of scientific interest in one of the patients. "Did you see anyone?" Father Benedict asked her. "No, there was no one in the foyer, and all the other rooms I looked into were empty as well," she replied. Then she furrowed her brow for a brief moment, walked back to the second door of the library without another word, and opened it. We watched her intently. "Hello?" she called into the other room. We exchanged puzzled glances. Dr. Tiller could no longer contain his curiosity. He stepped up to Lady Gordon and peeked into the room as well. After a brief pause, he could only utter, "Oh my God!" That, of course, was enough to send all of us rushing toward the door, which, as we immediately realized, seemed to lead into the very living room Blanche had strictly forbidden us to enter. The first thing I noticed was that several objects had been swept off the coffee table and lay shattered on the floor. But only on second glance did I see the feet protruding from behind the sofa. Someone was lying there. I rushed to my suitcase and pulled out my first aid kit. But as I was about to hurry into the living room, Lady Gordon tried to hold me back. "Wait, there might be evidence you could disturb," she stated, as if there were nothing more important at the moment. "Someone in there might need our help?" I countered, pushing past her. Mrs. Stevens McCormick followed me. We cautiously approached the person, making sure not to touch any of the objects scattered across the floor. It was a woman, dressed in a nurse's uniform. She lay on her stomach, her face turned downward. A pool of blood had formed around her head, yet there were no visible injuries. I gently took her hand to check for a pulse. The skin was cold. No pulse. Just as I had feared, the woman was dead. I decided to leave the body as it was. Mrs. Stevens McCormick and I returned to the others who were still waiting by the door. Father Benedict and Dr. Tiller were visibly shaken by the news that the woman was dead. Lady Gordon, however, was merely upset that we might have disturbed some kind of evidence. I still had no idea what kind of evidence she was referring to, but I held back any comment. "I'm going to look for someone who might be able to explain what happened," she announced irritably, then left the room and headed upstairs. In any case, I came to the conclusion that this was a matter for the authorities. The only way to alert them would be Ebenezer's boat. Wait a moment. Ebenezer? Hadn't the old sea dog just planned to store the boat and then return to us? I shared my thoughts with the others and decided to head down to the dock to check on him. Dr. Tiller offered to accompany me and grabbed an oil lamp from the foyer. I, in turn, retrieved my Browning Auto 5 shotgun from my suitcase and loaded it. Before my departure, I had been unsure whether I should bring my rifles to the island. But as a passionate big game hunter, I felt strangely naked without them. Of course, I was well aware that there were no wild animals on North Island. However, after spending several weeks in the jungles of southern Rhodesia among lions and elephants, one quickly internalizes just how defenseless an unarmed human truly is. At this moment, I was very glad I had decided to bring both my shotgun and my elephant rifle. Dr. Tiller, however, eyed my firearm with a slightly uneasy expression. "So you're expecting the worst?" he asked. I certainly was. When we opened the door, we were greeted by an almost impenetrable darkness. Clouds obscured the moon and stars. Only a few feet from the estate, outside the small circle of light from Dr. Tiller's lamp, you couldn't see your hand in front of your face. Still, I stared intently into the darkness as we slowly and cautiously made our way down the path toward the sea. Once we reached the bottom, we made our way onto the dock. It didn't take long before a body lying on the ground came into view. It was clearly Ebenezer's clothing, and the body was lying on its stomach. The head hung over the edge of the dock and was out of sight. Dr. Tiller and I rushed forward and turned the body over, pulling it fully onto the dock. When the light shone on Ebenezer's head, I gasped in shock, and my vision nearly went black. Dr. Tiller staggered back and began to choke. Ebenezer's skull was almost completely split from the top of his head down to his jaw, as though someone had tried to split him in half with a large axe. From the looks of it, that was exactly what had happened. It took a few minutes before we had regained enough composure to think clearly again. First, we searched the dock, without success. Where Ebenezer had tied the boat, we found only the severed rope. The boat was, of course, gone. Either the murderer had fled with it, or he had intended to block our escape route. Whatever his goal had been, he had certainly achieved it. "What should we do with Ebenezer?" Dr. Tiller asked. "I'd rather not just leave him down here." I agreed with him, but I also wanted to warn the others as quickly as possible. If the murderer was still roaming around here, they were in immediate danger. In our haste, we couldn't think of anything better than to each hook one of our arms under Ebenezer's and drag his body up the steps. Once we reached the top, however, we weren't sure where best to lay him. Leaving him in the foyer felt wrong, and we didn't want to subject the others to such a horrific sight. Since we didn't have time to deliberate, we temporarily laid Ebenezer on the floor next to the stairs leading to the front entrance, then returned to the library. Mrs. Stevens McCormick, Lady Gordon, and Father Benedict were already waiting there. Dr. Tiller and I reported our gruesome discovery. However, the others hadn't been idle in the meantime. Lady Gordon had apparently searched the entire upper floor of this wing, but had only found empty bedrooms, some occupied, others unoccupied, yet none of the occupants either dead or alive. Father Benedict and Mrs. Stevens McCormick had gone to deal with the woman's body in the living room and had examined it more closely. Both of them had gone pale. "That wasn't an accident too," Father Benedict pressed between clenched lips. "A pair of scissors," Mrs. Stevens McCormick murmured. "Scissors in the eye," Father Benedict added. By now it was clear to all of us that something was seriously amiss, and we were in an extremely dangerous emergency situation. The lady in the library, who was still stubbornly staring at her book and who was most likely a patient of the sanatorium, was our only living lead. Since Dr. Tiller, as a trained psychoanalyst, was skilled in dealing with mentally confused individuals, he offered to engage her in a therapeutic session. Perhaps he could get something out of her this way. However, he made it clear that it was essential for him to speak with her undisturbed. We decided that it would probably make the most sense for Dr. Tiller to hold his session with a lady in the library, as it was obviously an environment she was familiar with. There was also a couch available there. Since the session would take some time, it seemed natural for the other four of us to thoroughly search the rest of the estate in the meantime. Surely Blanche, the other patients, and Dr. Brewer must still be somewhere. We just hoped that nothing had happened to them. To be continued in Chapter 3. House Search.